Hi, Dr. J. This is video 2 for the applied assignment due today. And so, on this assignment, had to do with watching the TED Talk by Richard Petty, and then describing the main findings and relate the findings to what was discussed about attitudes affecting behavior, and discuss how the content in the talk can be applied to your current or future career. And so the TED Talk basically talked about confidence and how there's a misunderstanding that confidence equals self-esteem. And actually, what the studies had showed was that confidence actually does not equal self-esteem. That's two totally separate entities. And also that then thinking about attitudes and behaviors and how attitudes and behaviors also don't coincide. And so a person's personality and attitudes don't necessarily drive their actions, so don't necessarily influence the behavior. And in the TED Talk, Richard Petty was talking about the study that was done at the university and how if you are made to believe something, like for example, I think he was saying something about if you're made to believe that this one group is a smart group, and this other group is not, then you have the confidence to know that you are able to take on a task because you're smart enough to do it. However, if you are not, if you are told that you're not smart, then you will be hesitant to take something on that's difficult because you don't have the confidence. And that does not have to do with self-esteem, because self-esteem is the inner. So like how you perceive yourself versus of how others perceive you. And so talking about how could either discuss how you use so when looking at the self-perception theory, and looking at how that also talks about personality and behaviors, and how it would be counterintuitive to assume that the actions are driven by the personality and the attitudes is not necessarily the case as well. And this makes me think about some of my cases. For example, right now I have a case right now with a client who has had their child removed by CPS. And so then the reason is due to sexual abuse allegations. But right now, the biggest challenge that's going on is my client's personality and her belief. For example, if we're going to add looking at a reason action theory, right? And so adding a variable, religion. And so in this case, her religion takes control. And so she feels that her trust in God is what will help her see her through this, and doesn't realize that she's failing to acknowledge the possibility that her partner could have sexually abused their son. And so the faith is what has driven and also has caused a lot of conflict with all the providers involved, because there is the notion that she is unable to fully understand the severity of this, even though there hasn't been, substantial proof that that abuse even happened. And so that made me think of her, and me thinking about, when working with certain clients and not assuming that their attitudes and behaviors coincide, because I think a lot of times as a clinician, we would think that, this behavior is driven by this attitude. And that is not necessarily the case, especially after listening to the TED Talk and reading about the content with, the self perception theory, and also how variables can also influence persuasion and decisions that are made, and looking at that by the reasoned action theory as well. So I think it's being able to fully understand the client and also getting an understanding of what their personality is and what their attitudes are and how they behave in different contexts. So let's say that it would be common that having being angry, so your attitude is of anger, that you would lash out and be violent would be the behavior. But that's not always the case, because some could be extremely angry and their behavior is just to withdraw. So it's really trying to look at how sometimes certain attitudes and behaviors don't match, and so not assuming, I guess, would be the best bet when looking at working with clients, especially in these cases with CPS cases, and what the clients are being accused of and what the behaviors are, but what the attitudes are, because a lot of times there's the assumption that the attitudes and behaviors match, and they actually don't.